We are at the Department of English at McGill University, and today we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Jeff Dolven of Princeton University. Jeff, we're delighted that you're available to read your poetry for us today as part of a kind of windfall connected with the wonderful lecture that you gave yesterday for the English department at McGill as part of the annual Spectre Lecture Series. It was a lecture on poetry, on conversation, and on the concept of turn taking, which perhaps we can ask you about again today. So thanks very much for being with us today. I'd also like to extend thanks to several people who made this event possible. First of all, my colleagues, Professor Michael Nicholson, who heads up the Visiting Speakers Series for the year for the Department of English. And I'd also like to thank Professor Maggie Kilgore, who has had so much to do with Jeff's being able to join us this year. I'd also like to extend thanks to research assistants Anushree Joshi, Shelby Haber, and Ariel Pickett, without whose research and legwork and all-round logistical savvy, this event would not have been possible. So thank you. And to Pascal Thierry-Groux, who is multimedia technician for the English department, whose magic with tech makes all manner of things possible. I'll just say a brief word about Poetry Matters, what it is for those of you who are new to it. Poetry Matters is an ongoing initiative with McGill's Department of English, based in the English department. And it's essentially a para-academic network or nexus among faculty, students, and poets. And we try different ventures every year. This year, our attention is focused on the topic of attention. What Lucy Alford has called poetic attention. And this year, we're reckoning especially with ekphrastic work, thanks to poet Sarah Wolfson, who is with the project this year and who is with us today. And I noticed that happily, Jeff also works with a project called the Attention Lab. And Jeff, I hope perhaps you can say a bit more about that as we go along. Interested in possible contiguities there with what we're thinking through. It's fortuitous for us. So people are checking in today through the magic of Zoom from many different parts of the world, I realize, and welcome to everybody. Since Poetry Matters is an initiative based at McGill, we'd like to open by acknowledging that at McGill University, we're located on unceded Indigenous lands on the traditional territory of the Ganyankahaga, one of the founding nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The Ganyankahaga are recognized as the stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather today. And Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a place of gathering for many First Nations. Today, it's home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We honor and respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the community of Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal. So let me segue then to Jeff. Jeff Dolven is professor of poetry and poetics at Princeton University, focusing on the English Renaissance. He wears both scholarly critical and creative hats. His scholarly critical work includes Scenes of Instruction, Senses of Style, and Take Care, the latter of which was evidently written very quickly. And perhaps you can say a little bit more about that today, Jeff. Jeff is editor-at-large at Cabinet Magazine and founding director of Princeton's interdisciplinary doctoral program in the humanities. And his poems have appeared in such journals as the Yale Review, the New Yorker, and the Paris Review. His most recent collection of poetry is Speculative Music, and today he'll be sharing work from collections in progress, one of which is a new English grammar. And I think, Jeff, you may have more to tell us about work that is in progress at this point. And his ongoing collaborative para-academic projects include work with the Attention Lab at Mildred's Lane. So without further ado, let me pass things along to Jeff Dolven. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Miranda. It's great to be here, and thanks to everybody who helped make it possible. And that's Pascal and Anushri and Shelby and Ariel and also Michael. And it's just great. It's just great to be here. I'm going to start with and I should say, of course, also Maggie, who was the orchestrator of the whole affair. But I'm going to start with a poem, a series of poems from a collection that I've called A New English Grammar. And it's going to be a heavy dose of pedantry to start. They are, forgive me, I have a knock at the door. That was a very insistent delivery. But where was I? A New English Grammar. So the idea of this book is that if you, and it's a little book of about 30 poems, which is sort of now just stumbling on its way to press. The idea behind this is if you thumb through most grammar textbooks, including Huddleston and Pullum's New Cambridge Grammar of the English Language, you'll find a bunch of sentences that have asterisks in front of them. And that means this sentence is going to tell you something about how English works, but it's wrong, don't use it. They're the sort of counter examples, illustrations of the limits of grammar, what lies on the other side of correctness of the rules. But they're often really great little sentences. And I got quite interested in them and interested in what it would mean to try to make poems or make worlds within which this sort of strange, busted, broken language was in fact good currency. So I'm going to read 6 of those poems. And each of them begins with an asterisked phrase from Huddleston and Pullum. Because there's a certain pleasure in the pedantry of the grammar, I'm going to share my screen and let you read the poems. But before you get to the poems, what I hope is the sort of chewy interior, I'm also going to show you some of the crusty exterior grammar that gave rise to the poem. And so here, let's see if I can share my screen. And so these are 6 poems from A New English Grammar. In some subordinate clauses, this is not the poem, this is the grammar taken straight. In particular, in temporal and conditional clauses, the auxiliary will with future time reference is normally excluded, even in instances where in main clauses, will would be required because of absence of scheduling. Thus, alongside it will rain tomorrow, we have if it will rain or rains tomorrow. There's that telltale asterisk. We don't say if it will rain tomorrow, we will get wet. In conditional clauses, will with modal meaning is permitted, e.g., if he will go swimming in dangerous waters, he will drown. Thus, future time reference uses of will are grammatically distinct from modal uses of will in such subordinate clauses, so that again, the grammar will have to refer directly to the feature of future time reference. These examples therefore suggest, but do not, of course, prove that English does have a separate grammatical category of future time reference, i.e., a future tense. If it will rain tomorrow, then today it will rain without a doubt, which does not prove the contrary, though we can always pray it will rain tomorrow. That's to say, as sure as anything under the sun it will. And in the meantime, we'll keep tossing the basin into the air. Someone will the water to rain. Huddleston and Pullum again, either excluded from alternative questions. Are they coming on either Monday or Tuesday? You can say that. Are you either coming or not? Can't say that. Example 1 can only be a polar question, one with yes or no answers, while 2 is simply inadmissible. We'll see about that. Are you either coming or not, or not? Please check 1 box or 2. Be honest, there's only one wrong answer. Be sure to use both sides of your pencil. The boxes are larger than you think and often placed on top of each other. And truth be told, they have no bottom. Be sure to fill them in completely. Feel free to use both sides of the page. Certain semantic relations are excluded from the subject determiner construction, but permitted in the of phase one, phrase one. These are illustrated in, for example, the Roman coins collection. That's wrong, but the collection of Roman coins will do it. Shrubs, two kinds. No. The two kinds of shrub. Yes. Red wine's glass. No. The glass of red wine. Yes. The haystack's painting. No. The painting of the haystack. Yes. There is also no genitive counterpart of the predicative construction, the stupid nitwit of a husband, discussed in 14.1. Compare a husband's stupid nitwit, or of partitives like the youngest of the boys, or the boy's youngest. The haystack's painting hangs in the Met. The painting of the haystack, that is, the one by Monet, not by Van Gogh. The rose blue sunlit one with the stack stuck in the middle. It has this deal with many painters, also Millet, appearing not for a fee, nor a stake exactly, but for the sovereign right to have your eyes back whenever it wants. Expressions of duration. The admissibility and interpretation of such expressions also differentiates between the three kinds of dynamic situation. 18.1a, he reached the summit for an hour. No. B, he was dying for an hour. No. C, he played tennis for an hour. Yes. In an hour. No. D, he walked a mile in an hour. Yes. For an hour. No. He was dying for an hour, then he died. He was dying for an hour of not dying. It didn't matter to him which. He was dying for an hour, one special hour, hours ago. He'd know it again if it came again. He was dying for an hour, dying to do it again and again. The formes supercomposées in French are dependent on exploiting the possibilities of compositionality one step further than is done in English, where he had gone is not possible. Even in French, however, the compositionality is not recursive, as it is not possible to say il avait rassemblé. This is one way in which fully grammaticalized analytic constructions differ from periphrastic constructions like English to be about to or to have just, which can be combined recursively to give formally impeccable combinations, even if it is difficult to compute their meanings or find a use for them. He had gone. The door slammed twice. Thinking again or doubling down. It slammed again when we said it again. Most of our doors swing out and in, though sometimes it takes a little push. Others are one-way interior valves. Then there are doors that only open once and can never be shut again. We come and go as we please, oh please. And one more of these. Some and any express existential quantification, as explained in section 5.1. They occur primarily in determiner function, where they mark the noun phrase as indefinite. Leaving aside the free choice sense of any, there are polarity sensitive forms, with some having a positive orientation, any a negative orientation. Compare. We've got some milk, that's okay. We've got any milk? No. We haven't got some milk? No. We haven't got any milk, yes. The relationship between some and any is discussed in chapter 9, section 4.3, where we note that there are some special contexts in which examples like 2a are acceptable. We've got any milk, but only any. Was there one in particular you wanted? Sadly, that's just the one we don't have. Some of our milks are white and some are perfectly clear and some are blue in the bottle and vivid red in the glass. Which of these many milks is for you? Milk makes the man, but a man makes no milk. He gets what he asks for, all the same. So as I say, there are quite a few more of those, but you'll get a taste. In the blue milk, there's a little tribute Maggie will recognize to John Hollander, my old teacher, his great poem, Blue Wine, which I commend to you. The next poem I'm going to read is one for which I'll also share my screen. And I've performed it once before. It's an experimental poem in at least one sense, which is that it's about an experiment. I got interested in the sort of question of writing about experiments, and I thought about the air pump, and I thought about certain kinds of observation of stars, and have written stuff on both of those counts. But the one that has sort of stuck with me was about the Milgram experiment. Some of you may know about this experiment in the 50s, which was actually conducted in the basement of Lindsley Chittenden Hall at Yale, which is where the English department is housed. And it was an experiment that was intended to assess the deference to authority of its subjects. And it placed the sort of true subject of the experiment in one room, and a figure of authority in a white coat with a clipboard said, we are conducting, you and I are together conducting an experiment on another person who's in a different room. And it's an experiment on the relationship between memory and pain, and whether sort of pain prompts and triggers help people remember things. It's a very simple test where sort of I, as the true subject whose obedience is being tested, I read out a series of word pairs to the kind of pretend subject in the other room. And then that person is supposedly tested according to his, her ability to recall those word pairings. Each time that person forgets, I have to flip a switch on a box that gives a small electric shock to the person in the other room. With each wrong answer, the switch I flip increases the voltage. And the experiment is constructed so that what I hear from that other room are increasing expressions of distress and pain. So there's nobody in there who's actually suffering, but I, as the subject of the experiment, am made to believe that they're suffering, and that they're suffering by increasing increments as I go, because they have difficulty remembering the cues that I'm giving them. And the question of the experiment is, how far do you go? Because according to script, this person's expression of distress will go up a scale as I flip the switches from mild discomfort to extreme pain to silence after pain, possibly even death. And what Milgram discovered is that many people were able to go very far along that road in deference to the insistence and the authority of the supervisor. And one thing that is worth knowing additionally, just as I start to read, is that one response on the part of many of the sort of the 40 or so people who were so tested was that they would break down in hysterical laughter. So that's the situation. It seemed to me, as I thought about it, to be a kind of weird perversion of Petrarchan unrequitedness, these two rooms, this expression across them. And so out of that meditation, this experimental poem was born. And I will share my screen. It's in 5 sections. All we need is 2 white rooms, a box in one, a chair in the other, a sturdy chair with straps on the arms, a box with 30 switches on it. We're introduced. Now you go sit in the other room. I stay with the box. So what's the weather like, I wonder, over there? He says, begin. I read you certain pairs of words as freeze and burn, as nightingale and laurel, strictly by the book, as lark and dawn, some words to learn, a simple test of memory, and if it is improved or not by pain. Now I will cue the first word of each pair. You say it's match. Your voice comes through the speaker soft, a simple test, correct, correct. How touching when you first forget. He nods, I flip the first black switch. Well, I forget things sometimes too. Now try again, correct, then not. Another switch. I wonder what the weather is in the other room. Your voice is clear. It's soft but strong. It's touching somehow, isn't it? Another switch. Now, please continue. Touch is a branch or fork. It stems straight up the arm until it hits the mind, branches again, discharges, tells the sense, the feel of the switch between the thumb and index finger. The next word, lark, your answer, jar, is wrong. And so next switch between us to a switch, a spring, or else a branch, a relay, synapse, touch, springs from switch to chair in there. The speaker in between is hushed as spring might coil in a bird's throat before it sings. It's touching how you hesitate, how long, how far between 2 words, between 2 rooms, between the spring and now. I ask, may I review the words? Again, there must be some mistake. A sound of protest, just a cough, enough to give one pause to flinch, touching the next of 30 switches, touching the weather, touching the power of memory. I feel so close. To what? To you, to standing up, to singing. The experiment, he says, requires that you continue. There must be some mistake again. The gap between 2 words extends across the sense, across the room, intends a spark across a chance as now next switch, a reach again and branch the spark, only connect, flick of the wrist, intake of breath. More like surprise, according to script, than pain. There must be some mistake as now another switch by switch, a reach each time, the phone at night, a shock dispatched to ring a bell in someone else's weather, late, a bird's song in a quiet room, a sudden blow, an inference, a false alarm. It sounds the same. There must be some mistake, or else how could just everybody know for sure? Could he or I, your cry, exactly measured out to cross the open space between my hand and my hypothesis? Now, what conclusion has been reached? What can there now be said for sure? May we, I say, conclude. You say, my heart. I say, may I? He says, it is absolutely essential that you continue. I have to laugh. Each shock, not hot, not cold, not tart exactly, neither sweet, but in between something and something else. Between a word, a syntax, sparks, another word, between a thought, another thought, or if the shock is thought itself, only connect. The talk before you start to talk and talk to you. How curious how static builds up as one waits. The mind in contact with itself and in itself, electrified. Or if the charge is the same on either side, a thought might cross between inside, is this a test, and out? And you might reach, this is the part that hurts, how very curious, not sweet, but louder. Is that it? And salt to touch, as if to stand in a summer storm, connecting up to everything in branching tines, stand in the same storm as the next man in the storm, or woman, or there in the rain, and sing and hold that thought. This is a test of if the thought is the same in kind, so strong, so hot, we cannot let it go. And 5. I have to laugh. I'm not alone. Some 35% of subjects, 14 of 40, do. And 3 so hard we must conclude. So hard I cannot now recall the word, only the silence after it. The switch, and then the next, the cry, continuous, heartfelt, sincere, attack, decay, sustain, release, a song sprung in the open air, the weather here, the weather there, as a bird might cross from switch to chair and back again. I have to laugh. Again, there must be some mistake. You'd think the subject were myself. As action at a distance, as a laugh can jump an empty room, whether a lark or a laurel branch, a word touching another word, a simple test of memory. A cry is all across the room, still in silence. Switch now, switch my heart. You have no other choice. As how could anyone forget? As how does this experiment conclude? And what? You must go on. I would do anything for you. So it might be good to do something a little lighter after that. And so that's what I'll do. I'll finish just with a few lyrics that are relatively recent, and most of them I'm reading for the first time. So this is a chance I'm grateful for. The first one is called Analysis. Want to become a psychoanalyst? You'll have to undergo analysis. And if there are no analysts around for miles, or if, like Freud was, you're the first, you'll simply have to analyze yourself. Now, just how widely should this law apply? With teachers, the question mostly won't arise. They've all been taught. With parents, we hope, ditto. Your pilot probably took a plane as a child. The con man got his start by being conned. Doctors, of course, and transplant surgeons, a harder case, but let's not give up yet. In training, for example, each could swap some organ with a willing fellow student, something expendable like an appendix or a kidney. Kidneys, you could even switch, left one to the right and right to the left, sparing all parties the trouble of rejection. The patient will wake and hardly feel the difference, except for sleeping now on the other side. Don't operate, however, on yourself. Is this where the analogy breaks down? Don't operate on yourself or anyone who's operating as you work on you. The analysts may analyze each other, but never, says the book, at the same time. Too much, too much, too much, or not enough. It's good kissing the top of someone's head, and in a different way, kissing a bruise or a scar. And then there's kissing someone's lips with yours. Here's one that's also a little lighter. It's called State of Exception, and it has an epigraph, and I bumped into the epigraph because Nietzsche quotes it in his sort of essay on history, but it's reported by Swift. So it goes like this. Here you will find the largest elephant in the world with the exception of itself, supposedly a sign at a fair. Here you will find the largest elephant in the world with the exception of itself. And it's called State of Exception, this poem. Here you will find the largest elephant in the world with the exception of himself. His state is one of acute embarrassment, being as he will never measure up. Whether the great gray hide is hung too loose or stretched too tight across his history. The elephant keeper's elegant barbed stick, the sign of an inherited profession, is a glyph that spells the word compassion in a language neither man nor beast has mastered. And yet the elephant is king of the beasts, or at least he has the longest memory, a memory for uses and abuses, exceptional, it's true, by any measure. He feels for all God's patient citizens, accepting, heaven help us, for himself. Oh, let's see. This is called Consciousness. The seagulls are winging in at better than 40 miles an hour. The clouds pile up at 15, give or take, and the average professional types some 80 words a minute, meaning this would already be transcribed if only it were finished. So someone must be waiting, taking a cigarette break. How many of those get smoked a day? And headed for an early death at a rate of 365 days a year or thereabouts. What with the ocean coming on at 17 quadrillion gallons every single time you look, and you, every last one of you, don't think you can fool me just because you always have the same old name. That poem arose for me after seeing a painting by a friend of mine that consisted of a series of drafts of the painting that were on top of each other, and so sort of hanging off the wall, as though sort of every version were not only somehow imaginarily preserved in the final version, but were piled on top of it. So just seemed to me, what if that was our experience, that nothing went away and everything piled up. I guess this is another numbering poem, and it's called How Many Fingers? Can you feel your fingers? This is a test. How many fingers am I holding up? This is another. A third. How many fingers can you feel touching your skin at once? 1 is easy. 2 is mostly. 3 is surprisingly hard to tell from 2 or 4. 10 is more than 5, but how many more? Touching the back, the breast, it makes little difference. Nor can you easily tell, if your eyes are closed, whether the fingers belong to one hand or 2 or more. nor can you say how many hands are being held up exactly and how many not, especially if the room you're in is full. So call on the ones you already know to start. As for how many hands are held in the air at large, held up right now, today, this week, this year, the number is difficult to feel on any surface of the body. It's not like anyone is laying hands on you. This is a test. It's terribly hard to pass. You might as well try to count the grains of snow that fall on your skin. Count them all at once or down to one, down to that first, most careless, most hopeful moment when you were let out in the cold. This poem, I'll do 3 or 4 more. I mean, I always think about a great John Ashbery reading where he said, I'm going to read 5 or 6 more poems. And then he paused for a moment. He says, I hate it when somebody says they're going to read 5 or 6 more poems and they read 6. So let's say I'll read 5 more and not 6. This one is called Paul, Annabelle, Paul, and it is more or less a transcription of and meditation on something that I saw happen in the subway in New York that struck me as so strange for all parties that it wanted a reckoning. Paul, Annabelle, Paul. Down in the subway, a grasshopper descends on a woman's skirt. A conscientious man brushes it off, but he uses her hand. That is, he takes her hand in his and uses it to brush the grasshopper off her skirt to the floor. His name is Paul. His hand is a tool he uses to take her hand. Her hand is a tool she is surprised to find. Her name is Annabelle, the grasshopper. Is it a tool? If so, for what? For something to do with grass, the name implies, which goes to show the name is not the thing the tool is used for necessarily, though it was her good name he did it for, and also his. Seeing it there on her skirt, he could not fail to act, nor could he bear to touch it himself, as though it were a sign of sorts. And so he took her hand in his, as though it were a glove, or the hand of a child, or a forceps of sorts, or maybe a feather duster, and she was too surprised to take it back in time. Paul, Annabelle, Paul. No one else on the subway noticed what happened between them. At least no one let on. They barely believed it themselves. It was a courtesy no one should ever quite get used to yet. Yeah, so this is another poem that has organs in it, and it's the most recent, and it's called Experience Teaches. The organs study each other's functions diligently in the dark, and on a private schedule they rotate, always counterclockwise. This substitution is so subtle, so well agreed by all beforehand, it needn't wait for sleep. It happens between 2 sips or sentences. Experience teaches that any task too often repeated without change will start to hurt. If a child is by, it cannot join the transmigration, but later it is unaccountably wise. Why do they do it? They depend on us, admire us, and assume that must be what we do outside. All right, three more. Is that where we are? This is a this is a pandemic poem. I suppose everybody has one of those. And here is mine. I'll get it over with and then do two more that are not pandemic poems. But it's called Polio Song. A friend of mine is writing a biography of Balanchine and has a chapter on this affliction by polio of his sixth wife, I think, Tanaquil Leclerc, dancer. And I found myself thinking about that moment and this. It's called Polio Song. Let the world breathe for you. And for anyone who doesn't know about this, I wasn't alive, but I had a neighbor who was in an iron lung for a long time. And a terrible case of polio would put you in an iron lung, a device which enclosed the torso and breathed for you by negative pressure. So by evacuating the chamber, it would oblige your chest to expand and your lungs to expand. So that figures in this poem, Polio Song. Let the world breathe for you, withdrawing, returning, just like the tide. In rolling out, it lifts your ribs, then lets them fall when it rolls in again. Everything leaves you, then everything repents. Sing polio, leo. So it goes, so may it ever go. Time was you would no sooner neglect to breathe than you would forget to blink. Remember that? Blink once for yes, or else blink twice for no, or wait and let the daylight do it for you. Sing polio, leo. It only goes to show. Meantime, all day, all night, there's this machine which fits your deflated body like a glove fits in a glove compartment. Hissing yes and hushing no, breathing in loco parentis. Sing polio, leo. A sudden blow, it was a sudden blow. Who remembered to go to the doctor's office and who decided to go to the pool instead? How lucky it is not to have to decide. A child does not, a parent does not either. Sing polio, leo. Just take it slow, just take it nice and slow. Who is the parent of this body? You or me or someone else or all of us? My body, will it ever grow up, leave home? Or is it now a ward of the general will? Sing polio, leo. All of us now, all of us in a row. A ward of the expanding universe, which someday we'll remember and rush home, and then we'll have the wind knocked out of us, which sounds like singing till you hear it happen. Sing polio, leo. You had to know, surely you had to know. Meantime, here we are in this iron machine with a lever to close the curtain and open it. Everyone loves a vacuum, loves to feel how free it is to rush back in too late. Sing polio, leo. I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. And this is not a pandemic poem. This is just a phone poem, which is maybe another modern plague, but there you go. And it's at a couple of moments, it activates the International Phonetic Transcription System. I'll sort of flag that. I think it'll be obvious, but it's interested a little bit in phonetics as well as in phones. Phone. And it's in, I guess, 6 sections. Phone. I lay my finger inside your mouth, resting in a neutral position. You say what you need to say, and I transcribe it with my other hand. And then I read what I have written so you can hear it for yourself. Hear it even very long ago and in another country. I stand in front of you at the sink, holding your hand behind my back. You whisper softly what to say. I mouthed the words in the looking glass. Reading my lips, I traced the letters, each of them, into your open palm. Now you have the sound in hand. The message is, come here, I need you. I meet your eyes across the room with my eyes, watching as you spell each diacritical on the roof of your mouth, behind your lips and teeth. I track your glance as though I were the book you read at night in bed, sounding myself out as you go to the rising tune of I. The postman hands me a box of font loose as dice in the cast of mail. They chatter like a lottery when I hold them up to my ear. I pick one blind from the box and place it under your tongue, under because you have to read it inside out, to the falling tune of you. You clap your hands over your mouth, holding them there with your own hands, and pressing hard to make a seal, you shout into them good and loud. Does sound fall more as it travels out, or does it rather tend to rise? My hands rest on the table now and tremble like a stenographer's. I lay my finger on your screen and dial myself. I hope my phone is close. I hope that you'll pick up and clap your picture to your ear. Come here. I need you. Do you read me? This is an internecine call, first and last, and here and how I love you falls right down the mouth. All right, and here's the last. It's called Selection. I have seen a deer with antlers tipped in gold, and it was the most beautiful thing I can imagine. By daylight, the antlers' branches burned like tallow candles burning in darkness. In darkness, they burned like branching stars. It could be that somewhere near, there's a river of running gold where the deer, stooping its head to drink, was gilt by chance. But I have been looking for that river all my life, and though the sun throws coins, they sink out of sight in the water. You might think this was a dream, but no, here is the dream. The deer stood constellated above me as I slept and said with its golden tongue, I grow the gold from inside, according to the laws of natural selection. The gold draws hunters to me, drawn to me above all, and meek as I am the first and most readily martyred. The rewards due to the martyr are greater than you can imagine, and so I thrive, and so I am selected for. I would have thought endurance in this world, I said, is what selection means, and whatever comes afterward cannot flow back to favor any living thing. That shows what you know, said the deer, and I awoke. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I know what's ringing in my mind and attention is the image of the sun throwing coins or flinging coins. I'm imagining the radiance and the touch of the poems. Thank you for the poetry and for the virtuosic coordination with visuals earlier, the way in which you're adapting the poetry to the Zoom world, putting the modalities together. So why don't we, at this point, take a few minutes to turn to others to see what questions or comments people might have. As you know, one place that our thoughts are coming from is this topic of attention. I'd love to ask you more about experiments in attention, because at one point during the reading, you brought us to your work with the experimental in your poetry, and maybe you can say more about what it's been like working with an attention lab on, I gather, sustained attention from what you're saying. But let me turn first to others to see if people have anything they want to weigh in on right away.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about any of it, or indeed happy to talk about attention too. So I'm glad that it, at least from a technical standpoint, that the projections, the slides seem to work.
Professor Susanna Graham in the chat box is asking if you could tell the title of your last poem again.
Oh yes, it's called Selection. And that one
Okay.
is actually in the Yale Review.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Manuel.
Thank you so much for these wonderful poems. I was struck in the poem on the Milgram experiment by the very heavy use of colons, and specifically how colons serve to focus attention, but also they seem to oppose things, right? It seems to, on the one hand, say, pay attention to what's coming next, but also seems to kind of call back. So I'm wondering if you could talk about, it seemed at times almost to replace all punctuation, and just how that was functioning in that poem, and why it seems so suitable for the Milgram experiment in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it does. There is no other punctuation in the poem. You're right. It's all colons, and I'm really interested in them. They're a strange mark. They're a kind of connection. They're a kind of consequence, and both of those felt germane to the structure of the situation. How do I understand this primarily? Is it in terms of what one person is doing to someone else? Or is it a connection being made between them? And that sort of almost the sort of physical sort of placement of the colon. And in another version of the poem, I ended up putting a space on either side, as indeed many early modern texts do. That's an old convention for printing colons, to emphasize that sense that it was sometimes a balancing or an equivalenting function, and sometimes a consequential one. So, and it also felt like terminals on a battery, or just a strange mark. So there are ways in which that's, the whole thing is a kind of meditation on the colon as a punctuational synecdoche for some of the problems that animate the ethics and politics of that experiment and the sort of Petrarchan tradition and so on. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just jump in to follow up with the way that I loved the way that the visuals physicalized the colon, the punctuation mark, and when I was thinking about forms of attention, I was thinking about force and direction of attention, and the way that the colon guides in that way.
Yeah, I really have been preoccupied with that category for such a long time, and I was saying to Miranda before we all got together that with a group of friends over about a dozen years now, I've been a sort of regular participant in this kind of attentional practice, which is pretty simple in its structure. We just get together and 5 or 6 of us in front of a painting or in front of anything else really that's made to be looked at. It's slightly sort of ritualized. We convene in silence and arrange ourselves in a kind of half moon. and look for about half an hour. And then also in silence, disperse. And then by appointment, 15 minutes later, after you've had a chance to make some notes and clear your head, we get together at a bar and talk about what happened. So it's fairly simple. There's a little bit more of a kind of structure to how that half hour is spent, but it's taught me a lot about attention and solidarity, what it's like to pay attention with your friends, also as a mode of paying attention to your friends. And the kind of colloquy that happens afterwards is quite different from the conversation that I think a lot of us are familiar with in close reading, where we have a text as a criterion and we're assessing the sort of interest and validity, usefulness, et cetera, various contributions as we try to come to some collective view of the poem. In the case of this practice, all that anybody has around the bar table or cafe table or whatever it is, all we have are our memories, and the sort of process of talking about what happened, which kind of goes around the circle a few times, is purely additive. There's a principle of non-contradiction that sort of governs it, so that it's all the attention of all the people who are there, and it's a really great thing to do. And as I was also saying to Miranda, there's the practice is pretty simple, and anybody can do it. And once you do it, you know how to do it and can do it forever. But it has also a sort of complicated para-historical community of scholarly inquiry attached to it. And there's a new book to which I would refer you. And if you search for it online, you can pick up some other cues as well, called In Search of the Third Bird, which sort of talks about kind of speculative histories of how this kind of attention might have evolved, or these practices of attention.
Yeah, well, thank you for referring us to that, and that's actually linked to the Attention Lab, right? The book that you've just pointed to.
Yeah, the Attention Lab is a kind of ad hoc. There's this great artist colony in upstate New York called Mildred's Lane. Not upstate, it's the Delaware Water Gap. But in any event, it's run by this great woman, Morgan Pewitt, and we've just had a nice relationship with her. So we've gone every summer to kind of spend a concentrated week doing this, paying attention to whatever is in front of us. We'll bring things or do things that are up there at the lane, and for hours a day, looking and talking, and I feel like I've learned an enormous amount from that, although we have been mostly engaged with works of art that don't have their own temporality, images, objects that don't have a sort of necessary prescribed order of encounter in the way that a text does, or a movie or a piece of music. So we've done some experimentation with text, but it's been challenging and interesting.
Yeah, there are resonances for me with the way that we've been lingering on the concept of the ekphrastic, as I was describing to you, and really interesting to think about solidarity of attention, not only collective attention, but solidarity of attention, a kind of community formed through collective attention. And then one thing that strikes me too is that we've been thinking about how to construe the concept of ekphrastic attention broadly. And one of the ways in which we've been pushing at the edges of the way that ekphrastic attention is often thought of is that we've been thinking about attention paid not only to, let's say, a visual image or an object that is right before one, but then attention paid to the memory of that when one backs away and steps away, what you're saying, where there's a kind of removal to another location, another scene for the observers, what kind of attention is paid then afterwards. So yeah, thank you. Michael, you have a comment as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Jeff, and thank you for this to Miranda. I was, of course, thinking, Jeff, about your excellent talk yesterday, and maybe wanted to prompt you to think for us, or kind of talk for us about how you see the two projects maybe as connected or not. And you know, I was of course thinking about some of the points you made yesterday about these kind of simultaneity of voice, you know, the two voices kind of at times becoming one potentially through concepts of metaphor. Also the idea of, say, maybe a rules versus play, whether that be grammar or other poetic forms. Yesterday, Jeff talked about the sestina in an interesting way. You know, and so that prompted me to think about, again, the Milgram experiment poem. So in a way, I was thinking there about pun and the way, you know, the pun kind of does some of that work in the poem for me. And the reader kind of gets put in that position too of thinking about, are there supposed to be these twos, or is this an illegitimate reading? Is lark supposed to be fun, but also the lark? Is the switch supposed to be the switch that beats someone, and the switch literally, you know, and the change, the experiment as the new? You know, there's that ludic element to the poem that I think maybe Peter was picking up on in the chat. And there's also the inappropriate laughter, you know, in a kind of cruel situation that seems to, you know, there's this dangerous play or this kind of these twos in the puns that I was wondering about, or wondering if you were putting that together with some of the things you were thinking about in the other project, this kind of yoking of twos in that way, or simultaneities that sometimes can be somewhat uncomfortable for the reader, but sometimes they can be undoing binaries. The experimenter is the experiment, right? In a way there, or you don't know that you are, and the reader's kind of in the same position of being in both roles, right? Maybe experimenter and experiment, or the joke is on us and we're having the joke, you know, at the same time through these puns. I don't know. I just wondered if any of that kind of, those questions or others related to your critical practice of late kind of resonate here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know as I have greater authority in that in that observation than you do in some ways, but for sure, I'm always a little haunted by a Wittgenstein aphorism, which Steve Reich sets to music, and with his characteristic repetitiveness really drives into your head. It's a boy soprano who begins this piece with the line that's its title is "How small a thought it takes to fill a whole mind." And every, you know, the sense that, oh yeah, I really only think about a couple of things. So absolutely, there's a lot of revolving of common questions and common problems there. I was struck reading the consciousness poem to you of, gosh, that sort of piling up is very much the kind of stacking of experience and metaphor that I was talking about yesterday. And puns are a really great case of this in, you know, this sense that this is an experiment in which what's being tested is your ability to connect terms serially. You know, I give A, you give B. To take them figuratively, or to hear the sort of word that I give you figuratively, is a problem. And in this case, it's a problem that's punished. Take that as a pun, and punishment and pun are now active, and you're putting yourself in danger, at risk. So that sort of interest that I have, both in the utopian possibilities of simultaneity, of which the sort of pun is a little ludic kernel, but also the risk of it becoming too much, which is what happens over the course of this experiment. It becomes too much. There's too much electricity. I think you're right. I think that's, you know, it's another way into the same kind of problem. Yeah, I would defer back to the analyst to tell me why. that's such preoccupation, but preoccupation it is.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great.
Jeff, following on from what Michael is saying, I want to take you back into yesterday's talk as well, because I found myself returning to what we were saying about illusion. And I noted in your poetry several phrases that rang to me as illusions. At one point, I think there was an only connect, and I think there was a sudden blow. So Yeats and Forster were in there. I wonder, I mean, can you say more about how we pay attention when we register illusion? That sounds, very, very didactic the way that I've just put that. But I wonder what you've been thinking about when you think about possibly the stacking effect or experience that you're talking about when we're attending to illusion, when as readers or as listeners we suddenly arrive at an awareness of an illusion. What do you think happens to our attention? How would you describe that?
It's such a great question. And I should maybe frame my response by saying, and it's interesting, Maggie and I have been talking about our kind of common training and with John Hollander and this sort of special attention that was given to illusion in that community of criticism at Yale in the 80s. I feel in some ways I've been weaving and dodging away from that question. I'm so interested in it, and it moves me so much when it happens. But the style book is, in a sense, what other ways are texts connected to other texts than by allusion? What's the sort of more suffusing resemblance as opposed to the sort of punctual instance, referential instance? And then this practice that I was talking about of attention. It's a sort of, among the principles going in is you try to forget everything about this work of art. Even if you're an art historian and this is your period, you have to put away all that scholium and try to look at it innocently. No judgment, no interpretation. Be generous. Kind of these are the tenets, and these are all kind of impossible ambitions, but they're also sort of really useful to try. So there's kind of resistance to illusion in both of those parts of my life, and it's I would start to think about it in terms of some of what I've been thinking about with metaphor. There's a great Richard Moran, the philosopher at Harvard, has a great article from the 90s on metaphor in which he talks about metaphor as perspective, sort of taking the perspective of X to see Y. And that sort of funny moment when all of a sudden you're taking the perspective of Virgil to see Milton, or vice versa, that there must be some relationship between the demands on attention posed by metaphor and those posed by illusion, and some of the same kinds of double focus questions that I was trying to think about last time, yesterday. But it's a great question. Attention and illusion, what it means to be deflected from the text at hand into another text, and then what it means to try to bring them back together. I think that's as much as I could say right now, but what a great question.
Okay, thank you. Anushri, you have something.
Yeah, first of all, I really, really loved each and every poem, and please bear with me as I articulate my convoluted question. But we've been thinking about the ethics of attention, right? And when you were reading your poem about the fingers touching the skin and everything, the sensory experience was so powerful that it demanded our attention in a way. So I was wondering, as a writer, as a poet, as a creator, how do you feel about the ability or the difficulty to direct one's attention inward towards the self, as opposed to the ability to direct one's attention to events or things outside of the self? Because the power of the sensory experience, which demands our attention, sometimes may not be as strong when we are writing about things outside of the self or outside of the immediate senses that we have. So how do you, as a writer, as a poet, change your writing modalities sort of in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be a deeper question. And that poem moves outward from, you know, that experiment in a sense, which is a really interesting one to do on yourself, someone else. We actually can do, the hands are pretty good at counting, but I think they're really the only part of the body that is. And that was a question of a poem that begins with a feeling and sort of thinks about the consequence of that feeling. Because there's a way in which, you know, for me, it sort of moved into the classroom space, how many hands, and then into a political space where we're holding up hands. And so to try to walk across the poem without forgetting where it came from was how that poem does it. But to feel, you know, I don't know if this is a good paraphrase of your question, but in a sense, to feel politics is such a challenge, such a challenge. And especially if you, on a given day or in a given part of your life, you're not immediately obliged to.
Right.
Because there are, for some people, for some parts of their lives, there are times when they're not. How to feel it, how to get it into your body without being disabled by that. It is a challenge, you know, worthy of a poem, or rather, poetry is worthy of that challenge.
True.
And it's a great question.
Thank you for answering or trying to answer it.
Trying to answer.
Why don't we draw things to a close? Thank you, Jeff, for your generosity and your art and your thought and your ludic work. Thank you very, very much. So glad that this was possible. And we will look out for forthcoming work, because I gather that there's something in the immediate offing.
That's the idea.
Okay. Thank you so much to everyone.
And yes, thanks to everyone for coming, and thanks for making this such a warm room, even if virtual, such a warm room. So thank you.
Thank you all.